Okay, hello everybody. It was great seeing you all on Zoom last night. It really feels good, but I'm making these videos out into the void, and it starts to feel like nobody's watching it. So it's really good to know that you guys are keeping up. At least most of you seem to be keeping up, doing reading, watching videos, and I definitely appreciate that. Like I said, today's going to be a little bit shorter. I shortened this lecture on European immigration from where it was originally, just for the sake of time in this class. I have to cut some stuff. I cut a big section on Irish immigration, and just to, yeah, we have a lot to say on that. I don't know, I had to pick and choose which things to include. And this one on sort of broader European immigration really ties into a bunch of other themes in the class. The next few lectures, we've moved on from the race section into the ethnicity section, and the next few lectures are about immigration and xenophobia and racism, basically amongst white people. Today we consider all white people to be generally white, and I think of them. We don't think there's a lot of discrimination going on amongst these different kinds of white people, but that was definitely not always the case. And it ties into, for sure, some pretty extreme sort of racism. So, I kind of only kept what I need of this to work for future lectures, especially as we get talking into eugenics and the science of xenophobia and racism. And I say science really should be in quotes there, but they do try to approach it from a scientific approach. So that's for future though. Today I just want to lay the groundwork on who was coming to the country in the late 19th century, and why they were coming here, we're going to be going outside of American history for a little bit to look at what was going on in Europe. We've talked so much about African Americans. They didn't really migrate or immigrate to this country because they were kidnapped. We addressed how they got to this country, but we need to look at why other people were coming here before we start looking at the reactions that Americans had once they got here. So we're going to start with German Americans. One of the last groups that you would think of as being a group of people that had been discriminated against in this country, but it's definitely not always the case. Germans, were a time that were also seen as too foreign. They're never going to be able to assimilate. Like, they're going to Germanize our culture and ruin it. Where am I on here? There's definitely, there had been Germans in this country since the founding of, really going back to Jamestown. We saw, different Germans coming here when the United States gains independence. There's already German Americans that are here. Germans had fought in the war, very famously in the American War for Independence, very famously, mostly on the side of the British. They were hired mercenaries known as Hessians. The word Hessian, it's often today, at least when I was a kid, meant like metalheads, like dudes with long hair and like Slayer t-shirts were called Hessians. But they were German mercenaries that were called Hessians. And a lot of them had actually decided to stay in the United States after the war. And to be clear, when we're talking about Germans in this era, there was no Germany. Germany was what's Germany now is just a patchwork of all of these different little states, little kingdoms, little ducheries. It was really like almost 100 different little kingdoms that were made up to what is Germany now. But there was this sort of shared culture and language and history that was known as German. And this goes all the way back. The Germans really first appear in European history and written history when the Romans confront them, and the Romans really have a hard time beating them. The Romans were terrified of the German warriors that live off in the forest up there. And that's really their first appearance in written history. And but going all the way back then, they have these long sort of tradition and cultural um, cultural traditions that unify them as a people, even if their state is completely separate. And this will be important going forward for this reason. Um, so a lot of there starts to be more German immigration coming to the United States in the early 19th century, in the 1820s and 30s. There's a lot of turmoil in Germany. It has to do with a lot of fallout. That has to do with at the end of Napoleon's wars. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a moment. But as all of these Germans are appearing and settling largely in the Midwest, this is at a time when the East Coast was very well populated, and the United States was pushing the frontier ever west. And around the time there, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, right around the time Chicago is becoming like a settlement and growing as a city, that's when there's a whole bunch of Germans coming here. So that this new group of immigrants are settling largely up in that the northwest area of the country. And it was and they were seen as being too foreign. The country had this long tradition of English people, this Anglo, not even totally Anglo-Saxon, just in this Anglo culture. We're culturally British. There's some influence from the French in the South and stuff. And Germans were seen to be as a totally different kind of people. They have a different language. They have different kinds of food. They like drinking beer too much. Beer was not very popular in the United States. People did not really drink beer. They drank wine and certain kind of spirits, mainly rum. Whiskey was just kind of starting to take off at this time. The main things people drank were wine and rum for the most part. Beer was seen as this totally German thing that would corrupt American culture. They talk about there's lots of panic about the cultures being Germanized, and literally hot dogs and hamburgers are seen as this thing that is going to destroy American culture. Things like hot dogs, hamburgers, beer, stuff that is what we define America today. Around these foods, the most American food there is was considered German food. Hamburger, because it comes from Hamburg, Germany. Hot dogs are German sausages, and people were rallied against it. And they were worried about, Germans drink too much, the drinking is too part of their culture, too big a part of their culture. And that is going to ruin, their American culture. And these same arguments you hear today against immigration, saying oh, these people coming here from this country or that country, they don't want to assimilate, they don't want to become Americans, they just they just want to make money off our system and take our jobs. That same exact stuff has been said with every new group of immigrants that come in, including the whitest people you can think of, like Germans. The Irish were another one. I'm not talking about about the Irish really in this, but as Irish come in, especially Irish Catholics, were heavily discriminated against. It's also going to be a thing about the Germans coming in here that they're going to be a little more politically radical than a lot of other groups. There's a certain reason for this as well, which I'm going to talk about this. The first sort of leftist politics, communism and anarchism and stuff like that will come with these Germans. And like I said, there's a specific reason for that. But there is, of course, this reaction. The first time you start to hear any sort of hint of maybe, America needs to be for Americans kind of thing, is a reaction to German immigration and Irish as well. But it's seen that, nativism first appears, the United States was always supposed to be kind of a country of immigrants, but immigrants had not really come in huge waves until this. The country had existed for about a good 50 years before you start seeing lots and lots of immigration comes in, and the more immigrants come in, the more you see people that had been here for a little bit longer reacting to that. And the word nativism is that the idea of, native-born inhabitants need to be protected to get more than these immigrants. And of course, native, when they talk about Native Americans, they don't mean Native Americans. They don't mean Indians. They mean native-born white people. But we see a rise of nativism happening today, under similar circumstances, like I said, with the exact same sort of arguments being made. And people would talk about how, these people, it's a well-known fact that they're not as smart, that they're not as clean, they're more likely to be criminals, and things like that. And they have this sort of rising belief that where you come from, what your ethnicity is tied to all of these other traits that are inborn about you. That stuff that will sort of just, people will have that sort of assumption that born out of this sort of ignorance and racism. And it's going to, as we see going forward, it's going to become more and more sort of specialized and made into a science of these ideas of, a person's, national origin tells you everything that they know about them. Like if someone's from Ireland, oh, they're automatically going to be a drunk. Like those type of stereotypes, come out of this time. So there was even a group, but the Know Nothings were the first nativist organization that, of really any note in this country. And they began as a secret society that were, they'd meet, powerful people and, and people, people that could influence the culture or politics in some sort of way, would sort of meet in secret to discuss how to make life more difficult for immigrants. And knowing that, that's un-American, they knew this is an un-American, type activity and wanted to be kept secret. So they, they met in secret and tried to influence the culture in this way. And the reason they're called the Know Nothings is because if anybody asked them, do you know anything about this nativist organization? They would say, I know nothing. And, and then they would say that so often, they become known as the Know Nothings. But as they grow in numbers, they eventually realize so many people agree with them that they just come out of the shadows and they stop being a secret society and become their own political party, known as the American Party, which will briefly last through the 1850s and disappear around the time of the Civil War. Not because those people become less racist, but basically because they go into other political parties. They were never, really a huge contender, as far as voting, but a lot of people definitely agreed with their anti-native sentiments. And this is mainly, the idea of, immigrants coming in as they're super anti-Catholic. The Know Nothings are largely going to be Northerners. These are going to be not like the racists in the South. These aren't going to be the racist Southern Democrats, who spend all their energies hating Black people. These are going to be mainly people in the North and in the West who are worried, have conspiracy theories about Catholics coming into this country, that literally they have this idea that all these Catholics are going to start showing up and we're going to welcome them in. And one day the Pope could just order all of them to overthrow the country, and they have to do it because the Pope ordered them to. And that's a real thing that people believed, they were worried about actually happening. So I don't know, it's just extra reasons, people make up reasons to not like people who are different than them. So, there's all kinds of different, anti-Catholic beliefs that they would have, or just believing that, they don't, there's these thought, old rituals in Catholicism that did not, pass through into Protestantism, believing that's part of witchcraft. Puritans and the founding of the United States had believed, that Catholicism is basically, very close to witchcraft. So those type of beliefs will persist and drive the Know Nothings forward. Right here in the Bay Area, in California, the Know Nothings were huge. The American Party, won the governorship in San Francisco, for a while, almost all of the seats, mayor, sheriff, all of these seats were Know Nothings and American Party people. So, and we'll see that has to do largely with the huge Irish population that is here. I will reference the Irish stuff a little bit, even if we're not going into detail about the Irish. And then there's going to be super anti-Chinese as well. We have a whole separate lecture, which I definitely will talk about Chinese immigration and the reaction to that. Hold on one sec. I need to open the window. It's hot in here. Okay. So, before I go further, just so we get this base of the this idea of growing nativism, which is not unique to the United States. There's nativism in every country is going to have things like this, and that's going to grow into nationalism. You hear about white nationalism today. It's a more of a militant version of nativism. It's this idea that that the country is, the people that live here are the best people in the world. Just by the sheer fact of being born here, you are you are more special, and it's something that's that's deep into us, and you have this certain right to rule over other people because you are such a great people as a nation. And again, this is not unique to the United States. And actually, for a long time, people thought nationalism couldn't exist in the United States because it is a country of immigrants. There's so many different kinds of people. There's no, who could you point to and say, we are these one people and we are so special. We have this long shared history together, and that makes us so great. That doesn't exist in the United States. It will eventually. We're going to see that arise. And that's, the reason today white nationalism is a thing is because, basically all of those white people end up that were discriminated against separately will end up, becoming together as a thing and hating all other people. But I want to get to where nationalism comes from and how that drives immigration to the United States. And this really builds into sort of a grand theory of history. The area of history that I study, in mainly the 19th century, early 20th century stuff, that's the stuff I like the best to study. And I'm going to take you on a long journey here in this next few minutes about where nationalism comes from and, and how the world we live in today was made. So there was no such thing as nationalism until the United States became a nation. It was really, you couldn't have it because, there was countries, but the concept of a nation didn't really exist. There was really no such thing as patriotism, and that we think about. And patriotism is sort of the good idea of we as a people, as a country are, can do things. We can unite together, and that makes us great because we have these shared set of ideals. Or nationalism is just be well, we're great because my parents had sex here, so I was born here, so that makes me awesome. None of that really existed until you have the nation becoming a thing. And so what's different than I should really make a separate slide for this. Every semester I keep on make a separate slide for this section, but then don't. But so then there's a difference between a nation and a country. So through most of history, and really especially when you go through European history in the Middle Ages, you as a country were defined by who your king was. The country was defined by who the ruler was of it. And that was it. France was whatever the king of France ruled over. And the people in France didn't really think of themselves as being French. They didn't think of themselves as being necessarily special because they were French. They were just they just happen to live under the King of France, and they speak this French language. And borders would get moved all of the time, and the kings would fight these little wars with each other to move these borders. Within that, when I say little wars, it'd be literally like a few hundred people would line up on a battlefield, and that might change the border a little bit here, a little bit there. But the people where the border changes don't really care one way or another. They consider themselves tied to the area that they are in specifically. They're like, they live in Normandy, France. Like, we're Normans, who share this common culture together. The people in my village, that's who I feel connected to. They don't really care anything about who the King of France is, beyond, but if he can protect them or if he's persecuting them, that's really is all they really care about. Now, the nation is a new thing with the United States, because it's the first country that says we are a country founded on a set of ideals. We are, it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. We, like I said, we're a nation of immigrants. All of these different types of people are showing up here. And if you get on board with the Constitution, then you're part of the team. It doesn't matter where you're from. If you share these shared ideals of, about freedom and democracy, and you can do all this stuff, then you can become a citizen. That was a new concept. Nothing like that had existed before, and it's what makes the United States being so special, that we have all these shared set of ideals, to this day. So that's great. This new thing is born, and that is not, no part of that I think is bad. The American Revolution inspires the French Revolution, like just a few years later, starting in 1789. The French think like we're going to have a country based on a shared set of ideals too, on freedom, equality, and fraternity, and where the United States had a revolution in colonies. That was like, they were part of the British Empire. British Empire is over Britain's part of Europe. Over North America, there's these colonies. In North America, they say, we're not part of your British Empire anymore. Now we're our own country. So that's, these colonies separating. Whereas France was very different, because that was right in the middle of Europe. And they had a revolution right there and said, we are going to start this whole new system of government here in France. They chop off the king's head and say, like, it doesn't matter who the king is. We are French people now who share these shared set of ideals. And the French Revolution is a mess in many ways. Not a lot of people come out looking great in the French Revolution. There's the original revolution, then a counter revolution, and there's people that are always pushing to become more radical. Lots of people's heads get chopped off. It's really kind of a mess. But the one thing that's consistent throughout the revolution is this cry of fraternity, equality, and liberty. That's fraternité, égalité, liberté. They will constantly, that will be the motto. And really the only thing that is consistent through the about 12 years that we consider to be the French Revolution. Most of the governments in France there collapse. That will eventually lead to Napoleon becoming the emperor. And even though they started out as, they wanted to be a republic just like the United States, and at some points they want to be even going further, like what we would call now communism, this sort of like land distribution, seizing the land of all the rich people and giving that out to everybody. So going even further than the United States. But it was such a mess that they ended up appointing an emperor. They're saying, okay, fine, we're going to go back to a monarchy. There's some, we're going to keep some stuff about republicanism in here, but we're going to keep some rules about fairness, about fraternity, equality, and liberty. But we're going to have an emperor. And the only, like I said, the only thing that stays consistent in that, fraternity, equality, and liberty. Everybody in this new France are equal. We do have an emperor, but like every person needs to be treated fair under the law. Liberty. The government. There's no king that can tell you what you need to do. You're not bound by like class distinctions like it used to be. And fraternity is a big one. Like, we are French people together. We are all. We have these shared ideals, and that if we unify, we can be great. And as soon as the French Revolution starts, The other countries in Europe really do like this. The older kings of Europe are going to attack France because they don't want this to spread. They don't want this revolutionary spirit. Like I said, they're chopping off kings' heads over there. If they don't want to get their heads chopped off, so they send in armies to attack France. So throughout this whole revolutionary period, France is having to fight wars constantly. And this is part of why Napoleon comes to the top. They need a great general, and he is a great general. And the reason Napoleon is able to win all of these wars, that, this lone country of France is able to not only defend themselves, but will go out and conquer much of Europe, is because they fight in this new style of warfare, what we call total war, of not just small armies fighting against each other. You don't just have like these trained soldiers and knights who are gonna, joust for a little bit, and then then we have a peace treaty. No, the entire country is going to fight in this, and every young man that's eligible is going to proudly fight for the defense of France, for fraternity, equality, and liberty. And in all industry, people that stay at home working are going to be making uniforms and guns and all of that stuff. The entire society will be aimed at the war effort. And this was a new thing that the old kings of Europe could not fight against it. Like, millions of French people. Armies before this had been, like I said, like in the tens of thousands. And France has 1 million soldiers coming out of France. So, and all with a shared idea: fraternity, equality, and liberty. Through that, they are going to kick ass throughout all of Europe. They're going to go out and, for a while, really for, a good, Napoleon's out conquering for about 7 years or so, of taking up territory. And in that time, you can see on this map, he conquers most of Europe. Spain, Italy, Austria, Germany, even going up into Sweden or Norway. He really goes out and takes a lot. And the whole time they are going out there, they are spreading this message: fraternity, equality, and liberty. All these peasants, some German peasant or Italian peasant or something who doesn't think about this stuff, who's not very educated, never he lives his life doing his thing, and all of a sudden these soldiers come along and say, "Hey, we're not fighting against you, Italian peasant. We're fighting for you. We are freeing you from these corrupt old kings. You should join up with us. Fraternity, equality, and liberty. Doesn't that sound nice? You can be part of a brotherhood where everybody is equal, and you get to do what you want, and you don't have to, live by the king's rules anymore." And the peasants are like, "Yeah, that sounds like an awesome idea. I'm on board for that." So, not just, Napoleon's army is not just conquering land and territory and taking down monarchies. They are winning over hearts and minds. They are exposing this new philosophy and idealism to all kinds of people throughout Europe. Now, eventually, Napoleon will get beaten back. He goes out too far into Russia, gets caught out there in the winter. Much of his men die in winter. And by the time he retreats back, his army is much more weakened. The other, the remaining countries will unite and eventually defeat Napoleon. So he does eventually lose and gets pulled back. But that message that his army had been spreading, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It is already out there. It's in people's heads. You can't destroy an idea. You can conquer an army, but people have learned about these new ideals, and they like it. They want it more. So, even after Napoleon's beaten through the 18 teens, 20s, 30s, there's this growing sort of radicalism, and these political ideals are going to be talked about in universities and coffee shops. The old kings of Europe, they're back in power, and they're going to try and suppress this stuff. But you can't squash it. You can't squash an idea. There will always be people to pass on those ideas. There's always books that are printed that people are going to get a hold of, learning fraternity, equality, and liberty. So they need to, this really comes to a head when in 1848, and I'm not going to ask you to remember really all of these details here. It's a big, larger idea I want you to remember on this. So in 1848, a few different revolutions start at the same time, trying to overthrow some of these monarchies, some of these old kings. And once it sprouts up in a few places across Europe, there's many, many more. These kind of radicals who've been hiding in the shadows all these years are going to shoot out all at once and be like, this is our opportunity. We're overthrowing everything. And some of these revolutions are going to be communist. Some of them are going to be anarchist. Some of them are going to be for democracy and republicanism. There's all different kinds of things. It's not one size fits all. They're all in different countries. Each revolution's its own thing, but they do all have this sort of shared idea of like revolutionary, radical politics. And the kings are going to beat this one too. They will be able to put out each of these fires, just barely. All of those radicals that they beat are, if they're not arrested or killed, they're on a wanted list for sure. So they have to flee. They got to get out. And that's when you have all these radicals, especially in all these little German countries, fleeing to the United States and settling in Chicago, Michigan. You have they're going to take their radical politics with them. So that's why many of the Germans that are coming aren't your regular Germans. They're ones who are more already inclined to be revolutionary. And that will play out in all different kinds of ways. We're not going to talk into that really about the idea of leftist politics battling it out in Chicago. It definitely does. There's bombs and battles and things like that. But that's sort of outside of the purview of this class. But like I said, it would tie back in. So anyway, the old kings of Europe beat back these radicals and regain power again. And they realize we're never going to be able to crush out these ideas. These guys keep calling fraternity, equality, and liberty. This is just going to happen again. No matter how much we repress them, it's going to appear. We need to find a new a thing to give them to fight for. They don't. They're never. No one's ever wants to align themselves with the king just because. There's no like sort of altruistic reason to get behind the king. He might pay you to fight, but that's about it. You're not going to really stick your neck out for him. But if you believe in an idea, people will fight to the death for an idea, for fraternity, equality, and liberty. They will fight for that. So like, what could we give them to fight for? And that is nationalism. Nationalism does not, appear organically. It is something that is invented by the leaders of these countries, by kings and secret police groups that they have are going to put this real effort out. So the fight for your country, and they're like, okay, well, how can we get people to fight? What's the idea we can put out? What is an idea that is safe? We can't have like equality, or we can't do that. Obviously, they like their class system. They like the rich being rich. They like having their noble titles and the aristocracy. They still want to make all the decisions. If you start talking about equality, peasants start wanting to have their word on all of this as well. So can't do equality. Liberty, same thing. We can't have people thinking they have the freedom to do whatever they want, or try and pursue different jobs if they want, moving around the country, trying to get educated when they should. We don't want them educated. We can't give them liberty. We can't give them equality. But fraternity, that we can give them. The fraternity, the shared brotherhood idea, the idea that if you are willing to be part of something bigger than yourself, we are strong. And that's what nationalism is. It's the fraternity. And they said the thing that shares us as a country is we are this shared ethnicity. We are great people because we are all German. We have this shared culture and history. Remember when we kicked the Romans' asses? They tried to come up here and we beat the shit out of the greatest empire in the world. That makes us great. We deserve to be, to rule over all of Europe. And then, you know, the Italians are being like, hey, remember when we were the greatest empire in the world? Remember when we were the Romans? And, you know, we could do whatever we wanted. We never really wanted German in anyway. That makes us special. We are the best people in the world. That sense of fraternity and, you know, like, that is what becomes nationalism. And this is something the kings can sort of get behind. They get to be the leaders of these big national movements. So, to have this, to have nationalism and have ethnicity being the thing that defines you, that also means people that are not of your ethnicity are therefore in some way your enemy. They are at least an other. They are something that shouldn't be there. They're something that is weakening you if you have them around. And Europe had all kinds of different communities living in different places. It does not go in clean lines where, you know, in the area that is where German people live, there were all kinds of different, you know, there's Jews, you know, there's Romani, there's, you know, the French, Italians, there's all different kinds of people and communities living in those areas. But now, as these countries are starting to define themselves by their shared ethnicity, they are really going to start pointing out, hey, what are those other people doing here? We don't like them over here doing that. And they make for great scapegoats. They're like, well, hey, yeah, things that are wrong in your country, that's not your leader's fault. The leader's perfect. That guy's awesome. He's the leader of our shared new ethno-state. The problem is the Jews that are living here. They're the ones who you owe money to. It's their fault that that things are bad and you can't get a job, or, you know, that you've never amounted to anything in your life. So all of these other groups start getting scapegoated into, you know, and laws get passed. There's no laws protecting anybody in this country to say you can pass a law saying, you know, oh, Jewish people can't become doctors, they can't work at universities, they can't, you know, become lawyers. That they pass that type of stuff all the time. Or saying that, you know, okay, we in Serbia, you know, like Serbia's for the Serbs. We don't want, you know, Italian people that live here, they have to pay extra taxes. We, you know, like we don't want them to pay extra taxes. Like, so you have all of this increasing, you know, nationalism based around ethnicity. Countries are starting to define themselves around that, and this begins, like, new countries are born. Like the borders are literally redrawn for this. Italy was one of the first to unite, and Italy had been sort of like Germany was, a bunch of different, what they called papal states. It's complicated, but it's really, you know, just again, a bunch of small kingdoms. They unite around the biggest, the strongest king, King of Piedmont, which is in northern Italy. He becomes the king of all of Italy, and Italy, the whole boot, unites for the first time since the Roman Empire had collapsed. That's one of the first ones. The Austro-Hungarian Empire. This one's also, they could sort of complicated because it's too different, the Austria and Hungary. But they had, the ruler was already the king of both of those, basically. So they just align it to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But they're going to have sort of tensions because it's really two different kinds of ethnicities, two different kinds of people. And I don't know how you end up defining ethnicities. It seems like ridiculous today, that is a thing. And Austrians are really more German. Hungarians are more sort of Eastern European, but they have these shared sort of border, or shared empire in this. And they're going to have their own internal problems because of that, because as all anybody cares about anymore at this time is ethnicity. Germany is a huge one in this. All of the German states unite around the King of Prussia and become, for the first time ever, the German Empire, you know, this new nation, and they're going to be very big on their ethnicity. And, you know, it's no accident, you know, Adolf Hitler is able to, you know, exploit this sort of shared ethnicity. And you know, Hitler's big thing, he promises Lieberstrom. It's with living space. And it's basically, the German people are so awesome that they deserve to stretch out. They like being confined to Germany as it is. They need to go to take up more of Europe, which they really do have this historical right to anyway. That's the way he says. And what, you know, German leaders were saying at this time, we have this right to this entire area. We were once the rulers of all of that, and we should be again. And anybody else who is in here, well, they need to go or be our slave. You know, one or the other, because the German people are the best. They're very much going to put forward that idea. So you have all kinds of new countries, like I said, Serbia and Romania, Bulgaria, all of these countries, these little countries in the Balkan states, they're going to tear apart the Ottoman Empire because they all want to become their own little countries now based around their ethnicities. This becomes the thing to do. And every time that happens, there are people who are left out of that system. There are people who are, like I said, on the wrong side of the border with the wrong kind of ethnicity. Their nose is the wrong shape, for what the new national ethno-state says it should be. And a lot of those people are going to come to the United States. Where do you go when, if ethnicity is the thing that's getting you driven out of somewhere? Well, you go to the one country where it doesn't matter. The one country that's founded on this great idea of, the shared nation. We were not unified around any sort of ethnicity. We are unified around ideals, around the Constitution, around this inclusiveness, around democracy. Ethnicity doesn't matter here. At least it's not supposed to. Of course it does, but it's not supposed to. And it's better than in other situations. If you're in the fire, coming over to the frying pan seems pretty good. And there's all kind of, if people were in horrible conditions, living, like I said, they're like, you could be arrested for the tiniest step out of line in those type of countries. And coming here, people really believe stuff like the streets are paved with gold and things like that. And they're going to be surprised what they run into when they get here. But at first, and this is the wave of immigration into the country where, like, we think of traditional immigration. I always think of the American Tail, the Disney movie with the little mouse, Papa, Papa, and they seeing the Statue of Liberty and coming in through Ellis Island, and settling in New York City. That's, we think of as American immigration. That is this period. All of these people who, in lots of ways, are not even immigrants in a way. They're refugees. They were chased out of their countries. And a huge group of these people are Jewish, which is not hard to imagine because Jews are often, have made scapegoats throughout history. And there's a number of reasons for this, for anti-Semitism. For one thing, Jewish people were an ethnicity without a country. Going back to the Roman Empire, they were chased out of Israel, sometimes at the time called Judea, the Jewish homeland that they had, they were chased out of, because there had been a whole bunch of rebellions there during the Roman Empire. The Romans were just like, forget it, you people got to go. And they fled to Iraq. They fled up to further places up in Europe. They spread out throughout the world. And most cases live in certain communities for centuries. Have people living in places for centuries, but they're always seen as often foreigners in their, in their own homes. And they don't have since they don't have a country to call home, they don't have anybody that can protect them, anybody that can claim over them. There's no army that's going to, come fight you because, you're treating Jews badly in your country. There's no country that can put sanctions on your country if you are, if you're treating Jewish people badly. So they make an easy target because nobody can defend them. So that's one reason why. Then there's all kinds of stuff like, in the Bible, you remember, Jesus chases the moneylenders out of the temple. The one time he kind of really gets violent. And so there's this long-standing tradition against money lending, banking, it's, Christians didn't want to do it. It was seen as an unchristian thing to do throughout the Dark Ages and Middle Ages. They didn't do it. So Jews who were living in Europe, that they had been pushed out of their homeland and spread out, and they're in Europe, they don't have that same sort of taboo against money lending. So, seeing a vacuum for them to be able to step into, a lot of Jews go into banking and money lending. And this is how that stereotype, how it begins. There is this sort of ancient truth in that because of it's a job Christians weren't doing. So they step into that. And then once they do that, though, this is a job that who do you hate more than the guy you owe money to? That's, you're really grateful that he lent you the money, but 6 months down the line, when you're paying off that debt, you don't like that guy anymore. And, if people are going to chase him out of town for being Jewish, you'd be right there along with him. People become, like I said, not, distrustful and, looking for reasons to attack the people that they owe money to. So there's that sort of selfish reason behind that. There's all kinds of other things as well. During the Black Plague, this plague is killing people all over across Europe. Jews were dying in smaller numbers than Christians were, and a lot of that has to do with keeping kosher. There's all of these, in the Jewish Bible, there's all these stricture, rules in place for for cleaning food and just body cleanliness and stuff like that too. And they didn't understand, they didn't know what germs were per se, but ancient people figure out, oh, if we keep our food clean and wash our hands, less of us die. They had been, they're really big on passing down that tradition. So they were generally just cleaner than the Christian people. So they didn't get sick as often. But when the Christians were dying in large numbers and they see the Jews not doing it, they say, oh, it must be the Jews who caused this plague to happen. So more stupid bullshit like that. And you have these occasional sort of attacks on Jewish communities, and no worse place did that happen than within the Russian Empire. The Russian, in the early part of the 19th century, the Russians had conquered what's now like the Ukraine, the Eastern Europe, they like, in a huge area. There were a lot of Jews living in that area. They even had a restriction on saying, like, before that, they said no Jews were allowed to live within the Russian Empire, but there were so many living in that area, around Ukraine and the Eastern Europe area. And so, okay, we'll allow like a special dispensation. Some Jews can live here, but we're gonna have all these rules on where they can live. There's even, they can't live in rural areas, but they also can't live in cities. So you have these shtetls, these little like areas in the suburbs that were like the only areas that they were allowed to live in. And there's all these sort of restrictions on them. And anytime anything went bad in Russia, they always blamed the Jews. They said, oh, well, we were doing everything right, but it's the Jews. They have this great grand conspiracy. Don't you hate them because you owe money to them, and and all of this stuff. And the Russian Empire was a very shittily run empire. They were kind of constantly falling apart. There's a reason they collapsed and become the Soviet Union. They've been falling apart for decades. And so they kept attacking the Jews. It's like, no, our government's great. We're blaming them. A czar was assassinated. Tsar Alexander I was assassinated in 1780 or in 1880. And they blamed the Jews. The government really just kept hitting it. So you have like these widespread attacks. What had been ever so often occasional outbursts against Jewish communities, you had just constantly every community, and they're called pogroms. The pogrom, it sort of means riot, but it's like it's a targeted riot at the Jewish, specifically at Jewish people, and it's kind of just insane stuff when you hear accounts of this, people that had lived, people living in communities, like people that are neighbors. One day, the local school teacher, the butcher, the policeman, everybody's, sort of getting along. And then, something happens where, everybody attacks. That school teacher is kicking down the door and is going to smash your baby like against the wall, kind of stuff. The butcher is going to come in and rape your wife or something like that. And the policeman, he's not going to if he's not part of it, he's not going to do anything to stop it. The accounts you hear of this stuff are incredibly brutal. I'm sorry if that's a disturbing imagery. There's literally disturbing image that's coming up in a second here. This was taken. This is a picture. I think, if I remember, I'm actually kind of blanking on where it is. This was in Germany, but an attack on Jews in the 1930s. But this is essentially was a pogrom against them. And this type of thing where this woman, is running out of her house in her underwear, blood all over her face, and children are chasing after her. Children are a part of this. They've been taught to do this kind of thing, and that this is okay. That these people are not, they're not fully human, and it's okay to do this kind of thing. So this is the reason why so many Jewish people in Eastern Europe are going to want to get the hell out of there. Like I said, they're not immigrants as much as they are refugees. They are looking for anywhere to go. And most of them are the only ones that are going to be able to go are ones that have some sort of money. They're going to sell off everything they own, their furniture, just to get a boat ticket to come here. A lot of them can't afford that, and a lot of them are going to die. It is really, the ones that are able to be the kind of upper classes are the ones that can afford to just barely get out of the country. The ones that are left behind, this will be the birth of the sort of Zionist movement, this idea of creating a new, nation, for the Jews, and this will eventually lead to Israel in 1948. That history is also really fascinating. They were serious terrorists, in some parts of the world, but outside of the purview of this class, so we're not going to go into that. This becomes like so much of a thing that the Russian government produces this book called Protocols for the Elders of Zion, which claims to be proof of a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. And it's supposedly there's this secret cabal of Jews who are controlling the media and are controlling banking and controlling all this stuff. And this is supposed to be this meeting that they have, a meeting minute. Someone's writing down like notes of what's going on in this. And it's anybody who reads this can see that it's fraudulent. It doesn't make sense. In lots of areas, it doesn't make sense that if you're having a secret meeting to rule the world, why would you be taking down notes, first of all? And second, they get a bunch of historical stuff wrong. Like supposedly this was written in like 1899, and they're going to reference something that happens like 3 years later. Things like that is historically inaccurate. But when Russia is really, really falling apart, these agents, within the country put this out as, this is proof of the Jewish conspiracy. And it spreads out around the world. It makes it to the United States. Henry Ford, Ford Motor Company, the guy that starts Ford, he is a serious anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist. And he at his own cost, prints and distributes these books all over the country. And he comes up with all kinds of ideas like, jazz was invented by the Jews and given to Africans to corrupt white American youth. Weird ass shit. But this to this day is still, you can find this in dark places of the internet. Not even dark places, it's all over, and people will still cite it. Nobody that's actually read it, of course, but they'll cite it. Oh no, this is proof. There is this Jewish conspiracy. Like it's still out there, and it's it's horrible. And it's written by Russian agents. So most of the Jews that are going to be fleeing Europe, coming here, like I said, they are in large part sort of educated upper classes that are getting here. They're not going to be able to settle in very many places. Most are not speaking the language, that they had right away. They had to flee relatively quickly coming here. There is anti-Semitism in this country, so a lot of people do not want to, rent to them or have them come in the communities. So when they get off the boat in New York, they end up really staying in New York City, in the Lower East Side, which becomes extremely crowded, and tenement buildings of these Eastern European Jews all packed into there. But they do end up doing relatively well at the time. Since they're educated people, they have an emphasis on educating their own children. They save up tons and tons of money to be able to send their kids to, to nice universities and whatnot. After the next generation doesn't have the accent, they speak better English. They're able to, integrate into the community much better. So, if you have white skin, you speak English, it's easier to, assimilate into the culture than it is for some other people coming from other places. But there is, of course, still ancient and persistent anti-Semitism, which will be a running thing going forward. But they're definitely one of the big groups that we have settling in the United States at this time, that a lot of Americans are going to be like, whoa, these people are way too different. They have, their language is too weird, their food is too weird, their religion is not in keeping with our religion at all. So they will be, a group that will be freaking out Americans. Another one is Italians. Italians, I'm going to go into less detail on this, but essentially, these are sort of economic refugees. The new Kingdom of Italy was not doing a very good job of, for the rural farmers. That was a new economy that was there. Farmers across southern Italy weren't able to survive anymore. This was not necessarily an ethnicity sort of thing. This was more of a economic stuff that, in the new order, rural peasants in southern Italy weren't fitting in, especially in Sicily, and they will flee to land of opportunity, United States, in massive numbers. Like I said, I've mentioned these sort of anti-Catholic conspiracies, that this is going to be one of the things that, this idea of they're a fifth column in this country because they're Catholic. And you see, Italians, it's hard to imagine today them being a discriminated group. There's not persistent anti-Italian thought, but you have people complaining spaghetti, that's going to corrupt our culture. Spaghetti's ethnic food in America in the 1920s, and it's considered to be what now that we've accepted hot dogs and hamburgers, this is the new thing that are the Italianization of American culture is going to get ruined. We might get into later some stuff about sort of how the mafia comes over this time, the Sicilian mafia, and crime. I don't think we're even having time for that, so we'll get to that later, or we probably won't get to it later. So these are just two groups that are coming over, so two of the largest groups, and then I bring up because we'll be talking more about them. But there's, like I said, from Greece, Poland, Syria. You really have widespread Middle Eastern immigration at this time. The Ottoman Empire, which had ruled over much of the western part of the Middle East, was collapsing. That sort of disruption brings Middle Eastern people over, Muslims coming in large numbers for the first time, and each of these people are going to be seen, for one reason or another, they can never assimilate. They're too weird. They can never be real Americans. Is always going to be this sort of mantra, and there's so many of them that are coming, and settling in cities and a lot of part that. The more that come, the more Americans are going to freak out. In small numbers, people, don't have that much xenophobia, but the more that come, and the weirder they are to American eyes, the more and more there will start to be growing nationalism. There will start this country that was supposed to be immune from nationalism is going to start looking back a few generations down the line and say, oh, things were so great back then. Remember when things were perfect before all these immigrants showed up? And of course, things are never perfect. But just like today, people think the 1950s was some ideal period. The people that think that the 1950s was great are baby boomers that think the 1950s was awesome because they were children in the 1950s, and life seems awesome when you're 8 years old. The whole world seems awesome. So Trump supporters that are all about baby boomers today, and they're all kinds of things that were wrong with the 1950s, you know, aside from the rampant racism and sexism. Thing that always people forget also in the 1950s was 90% marginal tax rate, but you know, somehow that was the great era of capitalism. Anyhow, sorry, that's a huge tangent. You know, people were doing the same thing back then. The people that are there in 1890 are looking back to 1850 and saying like, oh, weren't things so great back then? You know, before all these immigrants started showing up, you know, and they're going to start having this sort of, you know, late 19th century, early 20th century version of Make America Great Again. Uh, I should just leave it there for that as a good ending before I get into the next one. I don't know, California, you know, briefly I wanted to mention, does not get a lot of Eastern European Jewish immigration at this time, but we do have a lot of Southern European immigrants, lots of Italians, Spanish, Portuguese, because, you know, we have a very similar climate to Southern Europe, you know, the sort of Mediterranean climate, that's where that comes from. Similar soil, you know, if you're a farmer in Southern Italy, you know, coming here and farming, you know, around Santa Rosa, it's not so different. So, you know, and not to mention because of our long, you know, Mexican American heritage in California, and then lots of Irish immigration that came during the gold rush. There is Italians will be, you know, there's less anti-Catholic sentiment here. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be safe, as we're going to see. And I bring them California specifically in here because California is going to be an epicenter of the eugenics movement. There's specific reasons for that we'll get to when we get there. But, you know, the growing number of Catholics here will freak out some other people, and we're going to see some really messed up stuff happening to, you know, Catholic people. Okay, that is it. I was able to keep that right in an hour, so that's great. I think I was talking fast. If you haven't noticed, I really love talking about this stuff, so I get excited. But yeah, I think that's it. I will pick up here with, we'll talk more about immigration and xenophobia next time, and then, yeah, and then maybe we'll get into a little bit about eugenics in the next one. Email me if you have any questions. Again, thank you for everybody showing up to Zoom. Stay good and stay safe.